Several days before the weekend of Hurricane Andrew, we were hearing some rumblings on the weather that there was a storm brewing. It was small. They weren't sure where it was going. And, we just kind of went about life as normal because we'd lived in this neighborhood for 9 years and there'd been nothing, no hurricanes at all. And so, we thought, well, we'll just do what we've always done and wait until we get word that we need to do something else. We had a couple of hurricane supplies. We had a hurricane map because they were all the grocery bags back then. So we'd save some so we could track it. So that's all we really knew to do. So on the Saturday before Hurricane Andrew came on Sunday night, we actually went sailing with my boss and my boss's family on Biscayne Bay, and it was a gorgeous Chamber of Commerce day. The water was just flat, it was gorgeous, but there was just enough wind to sail us through the bay. And there was us and just a few other boats out. We really weren't paying attention to anything but having fun. At the end of the day, we came back in, moored the boat in Coconut Grove, and came back to their house. The kids went swimming. We just enjoyed each other's company. About 9 o'clock, we headed home. We were in South Miami, and we came down Dixie Highway toward Country Walk. And we passed by Builder Square on 104th Street. It's not there anymore, I don't think, but there was always a sale going on at that location. It had been at Jefferson's before. And so my husband looks out and he says, oh, they must be having a sale. Look at all the cars there. This is after 9 o'clock when they should have been closed. So we're listening to Sesame Street tapes with our kids in the car. And so we go on down Dixie Highway and there's a gas station. And the cars are just in line for the gas station. And he says, oh, look, they must be having a sale at the gas station. And then we passed a bank. And there were people in line at the ATM. He said, they're not having a sale, something's up. So we took out the tapes and we started listening to them talk about the weather. And it was all about Hurricane Andrew and what to do. So we get home, it's about 10 o'clock at night. We didn't know what to do other than go to bed and get up the next morning and do what we needed to do. So we listened to the weather a little bit, then we went to bed, got up early on Sunday, and it was evident that the storm might be coming our way. So we got out the boards that we had and we boarded up every window, everything was boarded up. We put everything in from our patio, from outside, anything that could be blown away was all safely secured in our house, in our garage. And we took one car over, or before we did that, he took me to the grocery store. I bought what I could. I was the last person they let in the door at 7 o'clock because they'd bet the capacity. And there were no more buggies, so I used the kind of buggy that they used to carry groceries out and went around and got what few supplies were left in the store. We were prepared. Then we walked around the neighborhood, visited with other neighbors who had taken care of their house, made sure everything was okay. We were going to go to church that day. We called and they said, don't come. We've already, we're sending everyone home that's here. We're securing the place, making sure the church is okay. Just stay home and be safe. Then we looked into, should we leave? And we were watching the news and they said, if you haven't left Miami, the normally 5-hour drive to Orlando is taking 12 hours approximately right now. You probably shouldn't leave. So we stayed home.
We had prepared for hurricanes here at the zoo previously. We had several hurricane threats. We had one minor hurricane approach. So hearing about the hurricane for me was not really something traumatic because I had never really been exposed to a hurricane that was extremely powerful. On the contrary, I kind of thought that, well, it's just going to be a lot of wind and some rain, but nothing really horrible. I thought a lot of the people telling me things, the old timers, they were tending to exaggerate a bit. So for us, it was a lot of work. We had to get a lot of preparations had to be done here. We had to put away anything that could be a projectile. We had to pack up all the signs. We had to stock up on food, stock up on gas, stock up on water. It's a tremendous amount of work. In preparing for a hurricane at the zoo, you've got a lot of considerations. Things that people are mostly concerned about are really not a huge concern for us. Some of our large animals, the elephants, the pachyderms, the rhinos, the hippos, they tend to go in a barn. Things like the dangerous animals, the great apes, the carnivores, the omnivores, the bears, things like that. They're in night houses that are basically built of poured concrete and welded metal. And those night houses are built strong enough to contain an animal of that massive strength. So fortunately, they're also strong enough to pretty much resist almost any kind of storm. So there's not a big concern there. What you have to be concerned about is preparing food for those animals. Make sure you have food because the anticipation is power will be out. You may have a breakdown of transportation, getting supplies into the facility. So you need to make sure you have enough food and water for animals for several days, if not weeks after a storm, depending on how catastrophic it can be. But the big concern is for smaller animals, things like the birds. Flamingos, for instance, we had our flamingos out in an open air lake. You know, the great thing about this zoo is it's in a subtropical climate. We don't have animals in cages. They're out in open areas. So the flamingos, anytime we had a hurricane warning, we had to manually go out and catch these flamingos. It's like a flamingo rodeo. You're going out in the lake and there's flamingos flying all over the place. You're grabbing all these flamingos. And then we put them in the public restrooms here in the zoo. And the reason for that is, first of all, the restrooms have no windows. So they're basically like a bunker. The other thing is they're tile floors. Flamingos produce a tremendous amount of waste, and being kind of fish-eating birds, it's a horrible smelling waste. It's easy to clean up afterwards. We put them in there, we put a bunch of hay on the floor, and as unattractive as it sounds, it's also a supply of fresh water. We do the same thing with other birds. We'll put them in small bathrooms throughout the park. Smaller animals we put into smaller crates, and we put them into warehouses, into different buildings. So that's a ton of work with the animals themselves. People always ask us, well, if you got a hurricane warning, why don't you move the animals somewhere else? The reality is these storms can change direction so quickly. You may be moving an animal right into the path of the storm. And the stress of moving these animals is actually many times more dangerous than the storm itself. You know, when you have to catch up an animal, have to put it in a crate, you have to move, those animals don't understand you're helping them. They think something's going really wrong. And when you break that routine, that trauma in itself can be very dangerous to an animal. So we basically wait till the last second before we catch these birds up, put them in the bathroom, smaller animals the same way. You know, it's one of those things when you start saying to yourself, God, we're doing all this work. Something better come now because I don't want to have done all this work for nothing. So we sat there, we did all the work, we prepared. And basically people were talking about, you know, whose house you're going to go to have a party at that night. It was the hurricane party mentality.
The hurricane was beginning to approach Miami, and the editors at the Miami Herald weren't quite sure who was going to go where. And so they started to just randomly pick people in the newsroom and send them places. And so, you know, so-and-so, you're gonna go to Miami Beach, you're gonna go to Palm Beach, you're gonna go to Broward. And then they pointed to me and to Don Van Natta, who was a reporter at the Miami Herald at the time also. And he happened to be my boyfriend, and they knew that. Now he's my husband. They pointed to the two of us and said, you guys, why don't you just, I don't know, head to Florida City? But it was all very random. Nobody had any idea where this thing was going, who would end up with a story or not. And so so we made plans. We hooked up with Carlos Guerrero, who was the photographer at the Miami Herald, who was also assigned to come with us. And Carlos was gonna drive. And so we really didn't know what to expect. None of us had really been through a real hurricane before, and nobody anticipated that this was really gonna be one. So we get in the car, we drive, we actually make a pit stop somewhere south here because Carlos had a friend who was also a photographer who was gonna join him and shoot with him for somebody else. So we pick her up, we're all laughing, it's a big party, we have food in the back, some beer just in case, you never know what's gonna happen. And we're driving, but as we're driving south, we notice that everybody, of course, is headed north because they've closed the keys down. They're evacuating the keys, just in case. And we're still laughing it off because we think, please, what are the odds that this is gonna turn into anything? And so we finally pull into the motel. We check in, Don and I check into the same room, Carlos and his friend check into another room, and we just start hanging out, waiting and waiting and waiting, watching TV, Bryan Norcross, you know, everybody glued to Bryan Norcross, trying to figure out what was happening, where it was going. It seemed to take forever for anything to happen. But then we started hearing reports from people elsewhere, further north. It's horrifying. It's really strong. We're really scared. What should we do? Bryan would go to the bathroom. Just, relax. Just keep listening. And it started building and building, and people started getting more and more panicked. Meanwhile, Don and I are just like, we step to the door of the motel. We open it up. We go outside, and it is dead still in Florida City, okay? Dead still at the Comfort Inn Motel. We close the door. We come back in and say, well, it looks like we're not gonna have a story because we're hearing a lot of stuff going on and none of it is affecting us. So we hang out a little bit longer, we start getting more bored, we think, well, maybe we should crack open a beer because we're not having any of this.
My vessel was the research vessel, Seaward Explorer. She was a converted offshore supply vessel, converted to a U.S. Coast Guard inspected research vessel. She was 110 feet long with a 30-foot beam, drew 9 feet of water. When a storm comes, of course, the ideal is that we're not anywhere around. midday Sunday, we knew we were in for a major blow. And we loaded the boat up, put everything on board that might be damaged by a storm surge on Government Cut, where we kept the boat, and headed over to the port of Miami and prepared to put some lines on. And the sheriff department showed up with a pretty angry policeman saying we could not tie up there. And we explained the situation that we had been told we could tie up there. And did I have it in writing? No, I did not. It was a verbal agreement. Can't tie up. I said, well, we need to. We cannot go anywhere else. We're too small. And at this point, his hand goes on to the butt of his pistol, and he says, in no uncertain terms, if we tie up, he will arrest us. So we headed up the river, or to the river, and came up to the Brickell Avenue Bridge, which refused to open. And we sort of joined a large crowd of pleasure boats, sailboats, power boats, blowing their horns, calling on the radio for the bridge to open. And evidently the bridge tender had been given the word by somebody in the county or the city, not sure who. The different bridges up the river are controlled by different municipalities. But they were given the word that the Brickell Avenue Bridge was to be closed permanently because that was an evacuation route. Well, after we were turned away from what we considered our two options for safe refuge, the only other real recourse for us was to stay in relatively protected waters, and that would have been Biscayne Bay. So we headed out into the bay, and we went down the bay somewhere just south of the entrance to Dinnerkeek Channel, figuring we're a pretty good sized vessel for small constrained waters. Needed a little sea room in case the anchor were to drag or we had to maneuver or whatever we had to do. And proceeded to anchor in Biscayne Bay.
My father retired as a disabled vet from the Army after 28 years and moved to Homestead in 1947. He's the one that told me how to tell if a hurricane was coming. He says, well, the woolly bears crossed the road. I said, Daddy, what's a woolly bear? He says, the millipedes, the thousand-leggers that cross the road. And the alligators get up and walk. You will see them walking across the road, and there'll be no birds. If the birds leave, get out. And as time, I got a dire sense, and the birds left. And my partner, my husband, was not in any situation, and I'm not listening to you. I'm not going to put up all those shutters and get ready because it's not coming. And that was the whole sense of the area. It's not coming. And I'm telling him, it's coming. And he says, no, it's not coming. So the morning I got up to go get the wood for the house was too late. All was left was prefab fencing, picket fencing, $50 a sheet. And so I bought the fencing. I figured out how I could cut it in half and then cover all the little windows. And so many sheets would cover this. And we put them up. Every time I think about Andrew, I think about my daddy. Flat line on the clouds, birds gone, it's here. I was not prepared whatsoever in the least sense from considering all the hurricanes that had gone before. And we were fine. We didn't have water in the yard. That this was going to take my house and everything else around me forever. And it did.